Congratulations to NASABA on 10 amazing years. Congratulations to all the people who have served so illustriously as presidents of this organization. Anil made some references to things that have happened in my background, and I will tell you, I don't really understand sort of where I have come. Any award I get and any honor I get is really the result of things that people in my office have done. And I have the opportunity to lead 230 of the smartest and best and most integrity-filled lawyers that exist in the country. And it's their work that causes me to get any acclaim I might get. And so from time to time, it occurs to me that it's sort of odd that all these other people do the work. And Bruce Springsteen gave me, that's true, he gave me a shout out at a concert. I was on the cover of a magazine, and I go to events and people want to have their picture taken of me, and it's all very strange because I don't think I am deserving of it. And there are people who are sort of around. Sometimes they feel like paparazzi. And it occurs to me, given my undeserving stature, that this is what it must feel like to be a Kardashian. And you're probably wondering, if I were a Kardashian, which Kardashian would I be? Obviously, I would be Kanye. So I've told that joke before. I told that joke to a large audience where my parents were present, and as you might imagine, they were a little bit confused by the pop culture reference, and my dad was really confused, and he turns to my mom and says, who are these Kardashians that Preet keeps talking about? My mom turns to him and says, I'm pretty sure they are that very large family we once knew from Patiala. That's actually not true. I just like to say Patiala. You may have read they had a child in the last week. They had a daughter, and you may not appreciate this. They actually named their daughter Navneet Chugh, which I think is a great honor for NASABA, far beyond other honors that it has gotten. So a lot of these acknowledgments are great. My mom loves them, my dad loves them, but in truth, it is actually the case that I'm not popular everywhere. And I'll give you a couple of examples. After we convicted a woman by the name of Afia Siddiqui for attempting to kill American soldiers a few years ago, I was protested in Pakistan. After we convicted an international arms trafficker by the name of Victor Bout, also a year or two ago, I was literally banned from Russia. That's true, you can look it up. After we indicted the oldest Swiss bank for facilitating massive tax fraud by Americans, I became a persona non grata in Switzerland. There are internet poker players who think I am the Antichrist. This is also true. There's one insider trading target who, before his arrest and conviction, thought it would be a good thing to call and leave threatening messages on the voicemails of various assistant U.S. attorneys in my office, and he said a lot of things which I can't actually repeat in polite company. This is the nicest thing he said in a voicemail. He called me in a screaming voice a lying Indian piece of shit, which that's mean, I think. So it's been an interesting 4 years. Given it's the 10th anniversary of NASABA and so many things have happened, I feel a little bit nostalgic, and I don't know how many people were here 6 years ago. The first time I ever came to NASABA was 6 years ago, where the organization was kind enough to bestow an honor on me, and I spoke at the lunch on a Friday. I've been elevated to the dinner speaker, but back then I spoke at lunch, and I spent the entire time talking about events that I was working on when I worked in the Senate Judiciary Committee, working on the investigation of the firings of a number of U.S. attorneys, which ultimately led, not at that point, but ultimately led to the resignation of a lot of officials, including Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. And what had just happened a few weeks before I gave that speech 6 years ago, almost to the day, was Jim Comey testified before our committee in a hearing that Senator Schumer and I arranged. And it was the The occasion where he went to the hospital bed of John Ashcroft that you've been maybe reading about and seeing in the last couple of weeks, where he, notwithstanding how important the war on terror was, notwithstanding how many people were arrayed against him, he and Bob Mueller and about a dozen other law enforcement officials and others in the government were prepared to step down and resign, even though the war on terror was at its height, and even though during that time the Madrid bombings took place and hundreds of people lost their lives. He stood up for the rule of law, and a constitutional crisis was averted. And I think it's sort of auspicious that 6 years later, I'm here again, and I happen to be the U.S. Attorney, and Jim Comey was nominated by the President of the United States to be the Director of the FBI yesterday. And, you know, what do you call that? I think you call that karma. And I think that's an amazing thing. I thought I'd spend the few minutes I have with you this evening talking about a question that I sometimes get that I don't really answer very fully. And the question is, you know, what is it like to be Indian American and the U.S. Attorney? What is the relevance of your background? What does it mean to be an immigrant? And I don't really usually answer that question at any length for a few reasons. Part of it is I don't always love the spirit in which the question is asked. There is so much silly stuff that gets written. There is so much misplaced emphasis, I think, on the accident or coincidence of ethnic overlap. I'll give you one example. This is a true example. In 2009, just a few days after we arrested Raj Rajaratnam, along with a number of white people, by the way, that gets lost somehow, the Wall Street Journal, you may have heard of it, ran a story that began like this, quote, "It seems like a courtroom drama made for Bollywood." Yeah. The Sri Lankan hedge fund kingpin pursued by a fellow immigrant, the Indian-born U.S. Attorney for Manhattan. That would be me. Now, just imagine if they had run a story a year before that said something like this. It seems like a made-for-Broadway drama that about the biggest Ponzi schemer in history, Bernard Madoff, who is Jewish, being pursued by a fellow Jew, U.S. Attorney Lev Dassin. It's like something out of Fiddler on the Roof. Can you imagine someone writing that and how long that person would remain in the employ of the Wall Street Journal? So, you know, I'm a little bit, I will tell you, and I'll talk a little bit more at length about this issue, which I usually don't. I'm sometimes taken aback at how much is made of these coincidences. You know, my goodness, there's a South Asian defendant and there's a South Asian prosecutor. Holy cow. Can you believe it? As a friend of mine once said, you know where this happens every day? India. And nobody freaks out about it. And of course, you know, this has nothing to do with ethnic pride, and people should be proud of their background and their heritage and their ethnicity. I think anyone who forgets or forswears his roots not only disrespects his heritage, but is also not being fully American, in my view. And I often joke about all the religions in my family because I think diversity is a reason to be proud. There are a lot of religions in my family. As I often say, my children have, and this is true, my children have one Hindu grandparent, one Sikh grandparent, one Muslim grandparent, and one Jewish grandparent, which I think, if I'm doing the math correctly, makes them Episcopalian. People like to talk about the fact that I'm a Springsteen fan, and I am. I'm a huge Springsteen fan, but I like Bhangra too. But people don't focus on it. I think undue focus on ethnic or religious or racial difference, particularly when you're addressing issues of the rule of law, risks debasing the process and delegitimizing it. The law is the law, and the facts are the facts. And none of this can affect the duties and responsibilities of any law enforcement official except to make sure that everyone is treated equally in the eyes of the law. The fact is, no group has a monopoly on virtue or vice, and no community corners the market on heroism or hedonism. You know, I'm sometimes asked whether being from another country makes me more tolerant and more open-minded. And I hope that's so. But there are legions of non-immigrants and non-minorities who have fought furiously for tolerance and understanding for years. And you can find South Asians in this country who are as prejudiced as the worst white bigot. So I am not sure that immigrant status preordains anything about anyone's character. You know, I sometimes wish we focused a little bit more sometimes on those things that bind us together, those things that make us equal as fellow citizens, while also celebrating our diversity. I think it is something worth pausing to think about from time to time, the role that the law plays not only in protecting public safety and civil rights and in regulating commerce and human conduct, but in binding people together. Our system of laws is not perfect, and God knows there are imperfect practitioners within that system, and you're looking at one of them. But what the system aspires to do deserves respect and I think perhaps even awe. In this country, no one is above the law, no matter who you are, who you know, or how much money and power you possess. And there are precious few countries, even in 2013, where that would not be a completely laughable statement. And certainly, unfortunately, no country in South Asia. But the law not only equalizes, in this country where more languages and cultures and cuisines coexist than anywhere else, the law binds us together in ways, as I said, that we too seldom appreciate. In a way and over time, the law has become part of the essential social and cultural glue of America. Because here's the thing, whatever name you give your God, whatever book you deem scripture, whatever rituals of religious faith you observe, whether you are Orthodox or Reformed, whether you are devout or lapsed, whether you pray or not, if you are an American, you are bound to every one of your fellows in the greatest country that has ever existed by a pious faith in enduring principles of liberty and equality and the rule of law. That is the founding formula for our country, for our democracy, for our prosperity. That is the reason that people of all faiths and all colors and all cultures come here. That is the reason that those same people invest here and build here and stay here. That's the reason so many of your families came. That's the reason my own family came. And it is the reason that I can stand before you today, the son of a father who came from virtually nothing, who was born 74 years ago in a colony still ruled in the name of the King of England, who later absconded to the US with barely pennies in his pocket and with a young wife and an infant son with an unpronounceable name, who less than 40 years later has somehow, improbably, become the chief federal law enforcement officer in the financial capital of the world. Part of the reason that this can be is that the United States has built a system of laws, even if flawed and frequently in need of repair, that enshrines the right to equal opportunity and embodies the sacred American ideal that every child, even a poor or orphaned or immigrant child, can rise higher than that child's parents could ever have imagined. Whether to become the first South Asian Attorney General in California history, like Kamala Harris, or the first South Asian Solicitor General in New York history, like Preet Bharara, or the first South Asian judge in Massachusetts, like Sabita Singh, or the first South Asian magistrate judge in California, like Paul Grewal, or the first South Asian Article III judge in the nation's history, like Amul Thapar, or most recently, as we have discussed and honored, the first South Asian Court of Appeals judge in the history of the Republic, like Sri Srinivasan. These are phenomenal firsts, and they all happened just in the last few years, and it takes your breath away. And these are just the lawyers. Never mind the authors and artists, the scientists and soldiers, the actors and activists, the business leaders and political leaders and thought leaders who hail from a distant subcontinent and yet aim to transform this continent because they transcend quaint and tidy stereotypes of what is possible. And so I suppose that this is one relevant aspect of having a certain ethnic background. A first-time achievement within a community is something like a mini moon landing. It expands horizons. Yeah, I worked that into the theme. It signals something to young people who may not yet know that their dreams can become reality too, even though they may have a funny name or an exotic heritage or a misunderstood religion. I never gave any of this really a lot of thought. I think a lot of these people that get heralded, I'm sure this is true of Sri and others, you do your job and you try to do the best job as you can and let the chips fall where they may. Part of that is because I have a very unimpressed family, chief among them my 12-year-old daughter, who is not impressed by anything I do, which is a good thing. A couple of years ago, when she was 10, I was, for the first time, I was proud of an article that was in the New York Times about cases that we had done, and I gave her the article, and I said, why don't you read this article about Dad? And she read it, and at the end of the article, I was quoted, saying some very finger-wagging thing, to defendants, we're going to come after you, you're in trouble. And she reads it, and she looks up, and she's 10, she says, and I said, what'd you think, Maya? And she said, Daddy, why are you such a drama queen? That's true. Now, you should come to my house sometime. But a few months ago, I spoke at Columbia Business School to the business students to talk about how, to avoid going to jail, things like that. And, they don't all listen. And there was a man of South Asian descent who was in the audience who had wore a jacket and tie, and he came up to speak to me afterwards. And he was a student there, but he lived in the suburbs. And he drove all the way in for the evening speech, and he wanted to tell me that the night before, in anticipation of the speech, that he had looked me up and printed out a number of articles about things that I had done as the U.S. attorney for his 12-year-old son. And I said, why'd you do that? I don't even ask my kids to read articles about me. And he said, I made my son read those articles, and I said to him, look, this is what you can do. If you work hard, you can do this too. And that meant something to me that I had not appreciated before. And I appreciate that on the other side. Sri talked about his hearing. Let me tell you, I used to work in the United States Senate, and I spent 4.5 years in that Senate hearing room. And it's like, I have a lot of memories like people have from Nam, from that time, because it was a great job, but it was tough in a lot of ways. And I told myself, I'm never going to go back to that room again. But the one time I've been back in the 4 years since was to see Sri have his confirmation hearing. And sitting in the audience with all these fine folks and a lot of other people who were in the room and elsewhere, it was a weird feeling to feel as proud as I felt to see Sri do how he did and to see how far he's going. And that was an amazing thing and one of the highlights of my time as U.S. attorney, and it was about someone else. So I suppose you have to acknowledge the power of an ethnic or racial first. If Jackie Robinson can do it, then maybe I can do it too. If Barack Obama can do it, then maybe I can too. And if Sri Srinivasan can do it, then maybe I can too. And those are things that I think young people can take some inspiration from. But even this heartwarming idea, I think, is subject to limitation. Because ideally, one should be capable of being inspired without regard to common ancestry or ethnicity, because common humanity trumps all. Consider, after all, that an American named King was inspired by an Indian named Gandhi, who had himself been inspired by an American named Thoreau, who had himself been inspired by an Indian text called the Bhagavad Gita. That is a cycle of inspiration that transcends race and religion and creed and color, and the mere fact of that cycle, I think, is deeply inspiring if you pause to think about it for even a moment. Returning to the question that I began with, what is the relevance of being an immigrant from South Asia? To me, the most important relevance of being in that position, in terms of how I think about my work and my career and my priorities, is this. It drives a deep feeling of obligation to give back to the country that gave me and my family so very much. And I know this can sometimes sound corny, but it's true. I agree with the adage that to whom much is given, much is expected. And I think that principle in some ways goes double for recent immigrants. You know, our families chose to come here. Not everyone had that choice. They chose to come here on the promise of a better life, and if you happen to be sitting in this very nice hotel ballroom, by definition, that promise was fulfilled for you. And it is just too soon for people like us to take our country for granted. And as I often say, there is no one better situated to make good on that obligation, to serve, that obligation to give back, than a lawyer. As I also say, the power of your law degree gives you a degree of power that is unmatched in American society. And I hope you take every opportunity that you can to seize on that power. Now, I'm sure it wasn't easy for some of you to break the news to your parents that you decided to become lawyers instead of doctors or engineers. And so let me end with a quick story. Once upon a time, there was a young and idealistic man who decided to become a lawyer. But he first had to screw up the courage to tell his dad. See, like some of your parents, his father was a medical doctor and presumably wanted his own son to follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor himself. So one day, the young man musters his courage and knocks on the door of his father's study to advise him of his decision. He announces to his father, "I'm going to law school." The father looks up from his desk, surveys his son, and says, "What's the use of that? A lawyer can't be a great man." A lawyer can't be a great man. Now, notwithstanding this rather harsh commentary, the young man went to law school anyway. And before too long, he was recognized as one of the most influential lawyers in the country. That lawyer, by the way, was Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. As Justice Holmes would himself often recount, he spent much of his life trying to prove his own father wrong, that a lawyer could indeed be a great man. Now, vanishingly few lawyers will ever prove themselves to be as influential as Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., though Shri appears to be well on his way. Not every lawyer can be a great man or woman, but every lawyer can aspire to greatness. No lawyer can solve every problem or achieve every goal, but every lawyer can and must try, and every lawyer can do good things along the way. because lawyers like you are better situated than anyone else over time to work small miracles of change and justice, provided you have faith in the law's potential, and more importantly, faith in your own potential. And so from time to time in your career, I hope you will find some small way to show that lawyers can make not just a living, but also a difference. I hope you'll find some small way to show that lawyers can work the occasional little miracle, some way to show that at a time when so many cynics believe that so many attorneys are either demons or devils, that lawyers can sometimes be angels too. In my office, every assistant U.S. attorney, after publicly swearing an oath to uphold the Constitution, is also given a framed copy of a passage written by one of my predecessors, Whitney North Seymour Jr., who was a U.S. attorney about 40 years ago. At the end of the message about the special responsibilities that fall upon the shoulders of every assistant U.S. attorney, Seymour offers a word of advice aimed at the hearts of young idealistic lawyers upon the commencement of their public service careers. But I think his words are just as fitting on this occasion. It's a piece of universalist advice. And what Seymour preaches is this, quote, "One's basic credo should agree with Thomas Paine's. The world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." And so whatever faith you otherwise profess, I hope that you will always maintain faith in Thomas Paine's credo, and I pray that doing good becomes part of your religion as well. Thank you, and congratulations to NASABA on its 10th anniversary.